So, the first quote that I saw was on page 41, paragraph 3. People were not invited, they went there. They got in automobiles which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up on Gatsby's doors. So, I got out of it that Gatsby didn't invite many people to his parties that he knew, but he always ended up with a full house and prepared with drinks and food for a full crowd. So was he infamously known, or would he invite and why would he invite Caraway, like, out of all the people that he could have invited?
I had that quote too, and I think it's just, for one of the reasons I think he has it in there and not really explaining yet is to set up Gatsby, since we haven't really been formally introduced to him yet, to set him up as still like that mysterious kind of character we don't know much about. And it says that people, since no one really knew who he was, and a lot of people were just intrigued by that, so a lot of people would just show up just because they wanted to party and stuff.
I think the parties or whatever he's doing, like, it kind of makes him like a mystical figure, because you never see him, but there's these huge parties with like boats and cars and swimmers and fireworks and stuff.
It kind of adds to the mystery because he's like not seen, but he's like everyone's at his house.
I on page 39 there was a quote, and it said, "At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guest diving from the tower of his raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach while his motorboat slid the waters of the Sound." And it's just a huge like description of like a really big party. But like the question was like, why is he having such extravagant parties? And I said, like, is he trying to like forget something in life? Like, is it escapism, or like why is he doing these parties? And like a lot of people in the real world make up for stuff in life with escapism so they can just forget about it.
That's good.
One quote I found on page 56, paragraph 4, it says, "At the enchanted metropolitan twilight, I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes, and felt it in others, poor young clerks who loitered in front of windows waiting until it was time for a solitary restaurant dinner, young clerks in the dusk waiting the most poignant, I can't even pronounce that, moments on night in life." And I said this passage is describing New York as a lonely city, and one could even say it's kind of like one big Gatsby party without the dazzle and everything, but just more loneliness.
Kind of going off what Bo said, I didn't use this as one of my quotes, but in the reading, like in the middle of the chapter, he's talking to 3 ladies, and they were like, oh, like, Gatsby, they thought that Gatsby could have like shot someone and killed someone, and he was also like in the army or like some type of military service. But it was just interesting because they said like he could tell that somebody was whispering about him, and then like he was immediately just around them, and he was just aware of something.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people come, is because a lot of people, they just want to know who he is, because it's a lot of speculation. Like with that on page 44, where it says the 2 girls thought he killed somebody. Like Lucille talks about how she thinks he's a German spy, and how like during the war, so no one really knows who he is. I think that adds to a lot of the speculation.
And I think actually it's kind of sad, because if no one actually knows who Gatsby really is, it means that he doesn't actually have that many friends, and I don't know why he's having these huge parties and not actually like, I mean, he does show himself a little bit, but he never like goes around and says like, I'm Gatsby or whatever. And I know like many people are known like that, like kind of like almost celebrity status. Like everybody sort of knows who he is, but they don't actually know what he's like in like real life.
And that also kind of goes back to reflect on like the guests who were going there, because I had a quote that says, "Sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all, came for the party with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission." So based off of this, it seems like the guests kind of just take advantage of Gatsby and the elaborate parties that he throws, because none of them know them, like you said, and they're just there to have a good time, which kind of reflects poorly on them, but it's also like a common thread in that era to just have a good time and like do whatever feels right. And he also can kind of be responsible for it, because like he said like he didn't really create any rules as to what type of people were allowed to come to the parties, and so like it seemed like some of the guests' intentions were they just came because it was a party, and then he also says like some of their actions resembled people at an amusement park, so it was like uncontrolled and untamed as well.
Going off of that, page 40, paragraph 3, it says, "The bar is in full swing, and floating grounds of cocktails permeate the garden outside until the air is alive with chatter and laughter and casual innuendo and introductions forgot on the spot, and enthusiastic meetings between women and never knew each other's names." And I kind of said, this is kind of going like you're saying, a lot of people during that time were just there to party. And the inclusion of this passage really describes what the culture was like in the 1920s. Now it shifted from more of the refined, like in the 1910s, to this more wild side in the 1920s. Yeah.
So, going away from Gatsby for a bit, I was going to go to, like, Nick, because he says, nevertheless, there was a vague understanding that had to be tactically broken off before it was free. And what he's talking about is, like, he really wants to date the girl in the book named Jordan, and, Jordan, and Nick is actually one of the few people in New York that's nice enough to break off the relationship before starting a new one, and this is, I would say, almost a direct opposite to Tom, because, you know, he's having an affair, and he just doesn't even care about his wife. But also, Nick says, everyone suspects himself of at least cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I am one of the few honest people I've ever known. And what I was wondering is, like, why is Nick in this book so self-righteous and, like, he's like, the narrator is not always reliable in this book because the way he sees everything, he thinks he's, like, the best person in every situation. And to be fair, he's probably the most honest person we've met so far in the book, but everybody loves to praise himself on honesty, so.
And also, going off of that, he also says dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply, which I didn't really understand that quote because what I got out of it was like based off the way that he phrased it, you see moralistically where he aligns himself and like what he finds acceptable when it comes to women, and so it sounded like he was saying like dishonesty is something that you can't control, so you kind of accept, which didn't really make sense to me based off of like what you were saying, that if he was one of the most honest men in the town or in the city or whatever, then why would he slump down to the common thread being having a good time? Like, why would he go down to that level?
One thing about what Bo said, and it's not really necessarily just chapter 3, it's more about Nick as like a character. It's like we were talking about yesterday, how Nick could potentially be gay, or at least bisexual. It doesn't really make sense to me, per se, as if we were framing him as like, not framing him, but speculating that he could be gay. Why is he going after a woman character, I guess you could say? And I guess it just means he could be bisexual, or he's all over the place. I don't know. It's just
there was like
doors
a
open.
quote that I saw, and he said, I could only think of when that certain girl played tennis, a faint mustache of perspiration appeared on her upper lip. So I feel like he just sees her as kind of like, he looks at her in a masculine kind of way, and that's why he's attracted to her.
Yeah, and he could like her because she has all of the qualities of like being masculine, but it would still be like socially acceptable because she was a female, but she had the traits of a male, if that made sense.
You know, because it just wasn't acceptable to be gay back then,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
So in the book, there's all I know is that he's a guy with glasses, and he, for some reason in the party, he's like showing off a bunch of books, and he's like making people like know that he's read them. He's like, I've read these books. These are real books. They're not cardboard and stuff like that. And I had no idea why he was trying to prove that the books were actually books, because it's not a huge deal. And I really can't say much because it's just another one of the books like facades, because everybody's always like acting strange and like differently than they actually should be. I mean, he was drunk, but and then he crashed his car.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's a similar.
so rip.
I feel like he was trying to show off how like smart and educated he was, because he's like, I've read all these books, and they're like, I'm not lying, these are actual books. Like,
But also, like, why would you bring books to a party?
Well, I think those books are already there because it talks about when Nick takes one off a bookshelf or off
yeah.
the shelf, he takes it. On page 46, he talks about how the whole library is liable to collapse. So those books were already at Gatsby's house, I'm pretty sure, unless he brought a bookshelf.
But if they say like the whole library is like ready to collapse, then I guess that means Gatsby never actually went in there and like read it or took care of anything because
You just have it there.
You just had it there for sure.
yeah, because it's for sure.
I feel like Gatsby is so rich, he doesn't know what to do with all his money, and so that's why he like throws these huge parties with like all this crazy stuff. But he doesn't really like party life,
Yeah.
but he kind of wants to just like observe it and stand back. Just be like, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'll
Like,
paint.
going off of that, one of the quotes that I found was, a sudden emptiness, on page 55, a sudden emptiness seemed to flow now from the windows and the great doors, endowing with complete isolation the figure of the host who stood on the porch, his hands up in a formal gesture of farewell. So that kind of just made me like ask why he was continuously throwing the parties if he didn't know the people and seemed most content isolating himself from others and seemingly being an observant introvert. So like if he didn't partake, because he didn't drink, like everyone there would be drunk, but he would be the one person who wasn't drinking. So why would he partake in throwing the parties and like being the host for that kind of behavior if he didn't enjoy it and indulge in it himself?
I feel like he's just like a people pleaser, and he wants to make people happy and like give people a good time and like show them that, so that he has like a lot of money and he has this great opportunity and like a beautiful house to do it at. He can just like please everyone that he
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, that's true. Because even like I said last, like in that time period, it's all about like what makes you happy. So that would be like pleasing others and like having a good time and stuff. Which
But
makes sense.
I feel like if Gatsby like really wanted to please people, he would like walk around and do stuff in it. But I really don't understand why he's staying so isolated from everybody, because no one knows who he is and everybody just makes rumors about him, and he could easily just say, you know, his past or whatever. So it's really like he's hiding something and we just don't know what it is yet. And it could be like ominous or something.
Yeah, and I can't remember her name now, but like in the chapter he pulled the girl that Nick was with, I cannot remember her name. Jordan, yeah. He pulled her aside and like into a different room and then talked to her separately, and then she told Nick like call this number or whatever, and then she like left immediately and told him that she would tell him whatever they talked about, which was just interesting because she was like, this is private information or whatever, but if you call this and like I'll tell you what's going on or whatever.
But also, like, why does Gatsby invite Nick to the party?
Yeah.
Because Nick is just his neighbor, and no one else got an invitation, and there are probably far wealthier people there than Nick, or more powerful. So it has nothing to do with like power or money to him, I think, for the invitations. And like, we don't really know why Nick was invited, but we do know Gatsby like thinks Nick is special somehow, because he's also like the last one to leave, and Gatsby treats him personally and sees him personally, so there's something maybe Gatsby wants from Nick, or like some information. I don't know.
I feel like Gatsby was intrigued by Nick because it was like this little guy who moved into the house. It was kind of broken down next to him, and he just kind of wanted to get a better idea of who was living next to him.
But like, why would he want a better idea? Like, would it just be for the sole reason of like, so that he could keep everything that he has hidden continued, or I mean, why would he want to get to know someone like that?
Just throwing out a theory because we don't know yet. maybe Gatsby's gay. Just saying, it's a possibility. Just saying, you can't put it off the table yet.
Maybe. Anything's possible. Actually, that's a pretty good idea.
Leave Phil in suspense.